We talked to you about your personal story, how your grandmother did essentially the same thing to you, dressed you up like a girl, and you feel that that psychologically damaged you and led you into some of the gender dysphoria that you've suffered throughout your life. When you went to visit James and his father in Texas, you just wrote an article about this on the Federalist. Did you see some similarities in the way that James behaved and the way that his mother encouraged him to behave compared to your own experience?
Well, when I saw little James, I didn't see any indication of him wanting to be a girl. But then I had the same identical experience because when my grandma had me in her custody when she was babysitting me, she cross dressed me. When I left the house, I didn't want to cross dress. And so if you were to look at me outside my grandma's house, you wouldn't have seen me cross dressing. The problem is that when you cross dress a young boy, you've got a boy who's going to be confused about his gender. My grandmother affirmed me and encouraged me, and that's what this mother's doing. And I am really fearful for this young child because it totally ruined my life. Just those years of grandma cross-dressing me caused me to think that I should be transitioning into a girl, and I did, and lived that way for 8 years and regretted it. I don't want this to happen to James. It's totally unnecessary. This is just mom's idea about trying to, I think, weaponize her boy in this child custody case to keep custody of the boy so that the father can't get custody. That's what I really feel.
Right, and that's of course the other element of this story is that the parents of this child are divorced and they're battling for custody, and that's why the mother in the divorce proceedings is threatening if the father doesn't facilitate this transgender transition that he would not be allowed to ever see the boy, let alone have any custody. It's extremely heartbreaking. I mean, this is an innocent child. Well, I do want to ask you a question though. You mentioned in your article something about misdiagnosis and how maybe in our culture, because of the transgender moment or because this ideology has become a political movement in a sense, that there are misdiagnoses and rushes that sometimes practitioners or physicians or providers, whoever they are, feel pressure to diagnose a child with gender dysphoria when the elements of that aren't truly there. Is that what you see? I know you're not a doctor, but is that what you see when it comes to James's situation?
That's exactly what I see. And this is why I wrote the book Trans Life Survivors, so people can look in the book and see what happens to these young people when they're misdiagnosed and what the tragedy is, because there's 30 stories in there about the tragedies of misdiagnosing gender dysphoria. And it occurs in young people, teenagers, and adults as well. It's just an objective idea. There is no actual test to prove that somebody is gender dysphoric, except what you mentioned earlier on, persistent, consistent, and insistent. And he's none of those things.